episode 65 of the Stomp the Bus Show. I am your host, Mark Harris, coming at you after it's a week and a half after the Territorial Cup. We kind of took a week off there after Thanksgiving. Colton, how you doing, my man?
Hanging in there, Mark. Can't complain. Just happy to be back on the show with you. Happy to break this down a little bit. It's been a while.
Yeah, no kidding. Lot of upheaval in ASU football land. Where do you want to start? We have recruiting weekend this past weekend, guys entering the transfer portal, coaching changes, Territorial Cup.
Well, yeah, I mean, not a lot to break down from the Territorial Cup. We kind of on our last show talked about how at this point the games were just kind of like secondary to everything else going on, right? Like we were gonna have a couple games, regardless of the game. Like I think we both knew how that would turn out. I think I predicted ASU to win that game, and I felt kind of good about it early on, and then it just snowballed very quickly. So I knew that was a Hail Mary going in. I didn't pick it because I was confident. Just felt like a trendy little upset pick for me, and it completely backfired. So not a lot to break down from that. I don't think it's basically what we expected it to be. But a flurry of names entering this transfer portal, new coaching staff hires. I think those two things kind of steal the headlines a little bit.
Absolutely. Especially now. I mean, the game was, oh, my dates are all messed up. What day was that
Yeah, but
played?
I think it kind of stole the headlines like pretty quickly. I know that Dillingham's kind of exit interview, so to speak, after that game garnered a lot of attention just based on, him talking about this being like sort of a foundational season and, what things are going to look like moving forward and building upon what happened this year, all of that sort of stuff. But then from there, it was just like fast and furious, guys leaving, announcing quickly. I know there was the thing with Bourget committing a lot of money to the NIL collective. It's just been one thing after the other with transfers, coaching hires, NIL stuff. So it's like it felt like the next day we were already into personnel stuff. So I think that's pretty interesting.
No, that's true. And I'll share some thoughts on the Territorial Cup. Like, it was really after ASU scored that touchdown in the first quarter, it was like, it just felt good to be up in that game because you knew in the back of your head, like, this isn't going to last, and that's what happened in the game. Just ASU just could get no pressure on Fafita, and like it's not like he was like making plays in the backfield or anything. He just could just operate and work through his reads, and that was it. And the offense wasn't great. I like that Rashada was out there though. 10 of 22 for 82 yards is not a great stat line, but it's just another experience for him. And the good thing about, like, it's never good to lose to Arizona, but this is like the best Arizona team of the 21st century, versus like maybe not the worst ASU team of the 21st century, but maybe, so like when you put it that way, it's like, okay, like it's just not going to happen. And so, as ASU fans, we should be thankful that Arizona lost to Mississippi State and USC in games that they maybe should have won, because they could have been in the Pac-12 championship game. They could have been in New Year's Six Bowl. So that's really the only silver lining, is that U of A kind of messed up on some other opportunities this year that could have kept them from a better season. So that's where it is right now. And the ASU will probably never have a team as bad as it did this year under Dillingham, just due to the injuries and all that. So bad Territorial Cup result. But yeah, like you said, what's more interesting is the kind of the transactions, for lack of a better word, the comings and goings on the team. And let's start with the transfers first. The big three that are leaving are BJ Green, who announced today, that being Monday, December 12th, when we're recording, or December 4th, when we're recording. And then Jalen Conyers and Ryan Clark announced that earlier, shortly after the game. Honestly, of those three, the one that like is the biggest, like the one that hurts the most as a fan, just in terms of like their impact on the field, is going to be BJ Green,
Yeah,
because
definitely.
like he was legitimately making plays this year. I think he had tied for the team lead with 6 sacks, and 6 sacks in 12 college football games. Like I think in the NFL, we're like, oh, 10 sacks, like that's a good season for a defensive lineman or whatever. But 16 games, 17 games, college football, it's like you get 12 games if you're on a bad team, and so uh, that's just going to be tough to replace. He's a unique player. Um, and Conyers and Clark, so I don't know the eligibility with Green, but I know with Conyers and Clark, those two are essentially grad students. And so, like, I'm not going to sit here and be like, oh, they suck. Like, no, of course. Like, I would love to have them back as an ASU fan. I would love to. But if you're a grad student, to me, it's just, it doesn't like work me up in the same way that like when Eric Gentry transferred out, or when, that whole thing happened. So what are your kind of thoughts
Yeah.
on the three big guys that are leaving as transfers?
I mean, I agree with you. The front seven was like the bright spot of this team all season, and particularly the defense. Obviously we saw
Well,
some
the
letdown
first 10
performances.
games of the season at least.
Well,
But
yeah, I was
yeah.
outside of the games and those performances, right? When we're thinking about the letdown games against U of A and Utah and then Oregon, right? The three that they just got absolutely throttled in. Um, it's hard to look at those games and be like, we talk about it all the time on this show. If you're not playing complementary football, it's going to be tough
Yeah.
for one side of the ball to show up consistently. And, maybe we saw a bit of that in the U of A or the Territorial Cup, right? And U of A's offense just being
Yeah, the
lethargic.
Territorial Cup, that was just bad defense. Like there's no complementary football element to it. But in general, I get what you're saying, especially for
Yeah,
the first two. Yeah.
the brightest spot for the brightest section of the brightest spot of this team, right? The defense was
Yeah.
arguably the highlight of this team. The front seven was the highlight of the highlight, so to speak, or the strongest point of that defense. So losing a piece of that is tough, definitely. But I mean, it could be a sign that maybe Brian Ward knows how to sort of replenish that a little bit and find the right guys to play that scheme. Maybe they go out and they bring somebody else in who could step up and contribute. Who knows? Again, very um, different times in terms of personnel movement in college football. But that leads me into the other two guys, Conyers and Clark, who I mean, sticking around after the Herm firing and even staying
Right.
here for year one of Dillingham, I think was massive. If they want to go play somewhere else with their remaining eligibility, like I have no problem with that. More power to them. They've earned it, and I think they've done a lot to help build a foundation here. When you're running out of that eligibility and you only have so much time left in college football, you can't blame somebody for not necessarily wanting to stick around for some sort of rebuild.
Right. Well,
So
and I
yeah,
think there's
what do you guys
a thing that could be happening is like ASU is definitely doing better in NIL now. Uh, there's a report out there that Dillingham like raised, it was like over $1 million from some prominent boosters recently, just like with a presentation at one of their houses. And so like stuff's getting rolling, but you also like maybe they're like trying to allocate, like spread the money more wide on the roster, and maybe that means like Jalen Conyers could get 100K somewhere else, and maybe he could get 75K from ASU. These are just numbers I'm making up, but it's like, do you pay that extra 25K that like is the reason you don't get a impact, like a linebacker from the portal or something like that? So it's like it's like ASU and all the schools of the, like the mid-level Power 5 teams, right? Like the NC States and, I don't know how it would be in the SEC and Big Ten, but like all these schools in that middle tier, Virginia Tech and Colorado, Arizona, all these teams, you have to operate like a mid to small market baseball team. You can't just you have to be smart with how you spend all your money. At least at this point, maybe someone will come in and help it out a lot. But so that's could be part of the reason they're leaving. And like you mentioned, I mean, dude, they've been through so much shit with this program. They both, because especially so Ryan Clark had been at ASU since 2019. So he was like basically there through the whole Herm era, and the last year of the Herm era and the first year of the Dillingham era. Like that's a lot.
Right. Yeah,
And
Jordan
Jalen,
Clark, 100%.
Jalen Conyers came in the 2021 season, which was supposed to be the best year of the Herm Edwards era, which I guess it technically was. Then it was here last year when it all really fell apart, and then this year when you're building back up with Dillingham. So it's like those two guys had 8 combined years of experience at ASU and were both grad transfers. Like it sucks. Like again, like I'm not going to pretend to be like, oh, we don't want them. Like blah, blah. No, like, but it's just hard for me to get worked up about it. So, but unlike the BJ Green, where it's like, dang, like having him coming back would have been really nice. It just would have been. So, but again, it's a lot of the same like money allocation per player type of thing too.
Right. And I think this transfer portal era stuff kind of cuts both ways, right? Like,
Yeah,
you're losing these guys, but who can you bring in? And maybe you don't replicate a Jalen Conyers, right? He's an extremely talented player, or what Jordan Clark gave you on the back end, or what BJ Green gave you at the front seven. But you can go out and maybe attempt to fill some of those gaps a little bit with
right.
players who are transferring out of their respective programs, right? So it's not like all that's going to happen is you're going to see losses here, right? It's possible that some of these gaps could be filled, and obviously Clark and Conyers, they've been staples of this program for a long time, so maybe that hurts a little more like sentimentally than it does. And obviously great players, but there's a degree of sentiment that comes with it too. So who knows who they bring in, but it's just the fact that it's a possibility to go out and replace some of that production is like, okay, it's not as it's probably not as big of a hit as it would have been in an era where that wasn't necessarily possible.
Yeah, totally. So we'll see how it goes. Isaiah Glass entering the transfer portal. He kind of, I don't know, kind of left the team during the season right before the Utah game. So you could see that coming. Drew Pine entered the portal. Some of the backup guys like James and Jonkum entered the portal. So that's part of it. And, honestly, like the portal's great for guys who aren't playing. And, like that's like ideally what the purpose of the portal is for. It's like, hey, I'm not playing here. I want to go somewhere else so I can play. It's a little different when you add in tampering and all that, but I'm sure ASU is tampering with other people too. So
yeah, 100%. And just
they should be.
Too, it's and obviously there's still time. I don't know how long this first window is open for players to enter. Do you know?
I don't know. I think it's like the whole month or something.
Okay.
Maybe it's like 2 weeks. I don't know.
Obviously a lot of time left, but you're going through it, and outside of Conyers, you haven't seen any huge offensive names enter the portal, right? Like,
yes.
Obviously you hold your breath with guys that were huge, again, outside of Conyers, because he was one of those guys, and it hurts to lose him, but his situation kind of adds context to that. You're not losing somebody like Elijah Badger, knock on wood, or you haven't seen, I mean, we saw Drew Pine enter, but that's a graduate thing. That's completely different. But you haven't really seen Jaden Rashada or anything like that, right? So maybe that doesn't sound like the likeliest of scenarios, but I think in this era, you just hold your breath on everybody until the window is closed.
Yeah.
And you know who you have. So, I mean, Rashada is hopefully somebody that they can build around offensively. And I mean, there's going to be, we'll get into it in a little bit, but new pieces comprising that offense and that offensive staff who will get to hopefully work with Rashada. So we'll kind of see what happens there. And then plus you get the guys back who couldn't play, like Jake Smith and there was
all the
somebody else.
injured offensive linemen.
Right. There's a lot of like internal reinforcement coming, I think, too, next season. Guys who are already in the building. So that's always good. But yeah, hopefully they're able to weather the transfer storm, so to speak, and kind of stay relatively intact.
Yeah. And there is a through line with the three players who we mentioned, BJ Green, Jalen Conyers, and Ryan Clark, is that they've all been at ASU through this 3 years of just, and I'm including the 2021 season in that, like the 3 years of just weirdness and coaching changes and bowl bans, and they all could have left, after what was it, after the 21 season, the transfer window in 2022 following spring practice, when that was the exodus when it began, when Gentry leaves, Ricky Pearsall leaves, all the other wide receivers leave. Jaden Daniels left before then, and so it's hard. Like, that's another aspect of this. It's like these guys could have left at many different points, and so like the fact that they're all leaving, like maybe with 1 year left, is like shows that they actually kind of are dedicated to the program. They're just like, hey, like I just want to see something else before my college career ends, whatever. Like, I don't know, like maybe they do trust Dillingham, but they're like, I just don't know, like if, who knows? I want to play for a national championship, like all this stuff. So it's like, and whatever, like, so that's fine. And another thing I would say in terms of transfers is the University of Arizona lost a good chunk of transfers this past offseason. And they're the number 14 or 15 team, I think 14 in the playoff rankings. They went 9-3 and have a chance of have a 10-win season. And like, that's good. That's good for ASU. That would be a good season. And so like, it is possible that like you can lose some guys and still be good the next year. And in terms of Badger, you mentioned, I saw just on Twitter, like him promoting some like Burrito Express thing, and I saw Scattaboo. Marcus Arroyo posted a picture of Sun Devil Stadium, which obviously indicates that he's the new OC. Scattaboo was like, "Welcome to meet you, coach," or whatever. So like those are just contextual clues. Like those two are probably going to return, so that's good.
Yeah, no, that's always good. Any continuity you can keep in this era of just like constant turnover, I think is extremely. It only helps you. Like, it doesn't necessarily hurt. So anybody who's going to stick around, especially contributors from last year like Scatabo, Badger, those sorts of guys, I think that's huge. So yeah, and you kind of got into the new OC a little bit, Marcus Arroyo, right? So yeah, you can take that. I know you brought it up.
Yeah, for sure. So Marcus Arroyo, he first kind of came to fame. He was the offensive coordinator for the Justin Herbert teams under Mario Cristobal. And honestly, like I didn't think that he was a good offensive coordinator back then, because you saw like how Herbert just, there was a lot of weird, like a lot of like unrealized potential in his college career. And we're kind of seeing that in the NFL, although they did win a Rose Bowl. So it's not like it was a complete disaster. But it is interesting that like after, he left because he became the head coach of UNLV, not a successful coach, but it was like 1 year he started out 2-10, then went 5-7, and then eventually it wasn't enough. But it's not like Mario Cristobal, like is a tough coach to work for if you want to do creative things offensively like that. He's not, Mike McDaniel
Yeah.
or like Andy Reid. Like this dude is maybe one of like the most successful Neanderthal head coach there is right now. Like, and so, Miami quarterback Tyler Van Dyke recently went in the portal, so I think that does add context. And again, I'm not an expert in any of this stuff, but just based on like some of the reaction I saw was people were a lot more like, oh, this is a decent hire than like when they brought in Baldwin, and that we saw how that worked out because he's no longer on staff.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, again, he worked with Justin Herbert at the very least. That's a name on his resume. So
Yeah.
if we're looking for developing a quarterback, at least he's somebody who's at the very least worked with a talented guy. And we obviously know Dillingham's track record. So anybody who has that sort of experience and maybe can be developed, I guess, by Dillingham. It's weird to say developed because Dillingham's only like 33 years old, but somebody who can come in and learn from Dillingham and learn from what he does, maybe that unlocks some things. So, and obviously Dillingham is an offensive guy, so he's going to have some say in what's going on. It's not going to be Arroyo on an island, so to speak,
Right.
but those two guys putting their talking about it and putting their heads together, I think can only bode well for hopefully Jaden Rashada or whoever else is under center next year.
Well, and I think it's impressive that he was a head coach at one point,
Right.
Like, and his head coaching record, I think, so he has a 7-23 overall record at UNLV, which that is not like, obviously that's terrible. It's a little, when you look into it, it's a little misleading because his first year was in 2020 and UNLV went 0-6, but it's like, okay, like it's still the 2020 season. Like it is, you look back at it in college football, especially, and it really looks like just like a funhouse mirror type season. Like a lot of weird stuff went on that year. I mean, you look at the quarterbacks drafted in the 21 draft, and the only one that's good is Lawrence. And he was he's always been good, throughout his entire life as a quarterback. So 0-6 year one, then they improved 2-10 year two. 2022, they go 5-7. But then they fired him. So it worked out, I guess, because UNLV has done better since then. But those are, I mean, the players that are on this UNLV team that played for the Mountain West Championship, a lot of them were recruited by Arroyo, right? Not all of them, but a lot of them were. And so when you factor that in, he's been at Oregon, so like you've had to recruit big time there. And I mean, having him as a recruiter maybe that's the biggest reason he's even here is maybe Dillingham will still call plays and he'll be a recruiter focused offensive coordinator. I don't know, but it does feel like he has a lot of strengths. Like maybe he's not like the best play caller of all time, but when you add in the recruiting element, and I mean, I'm sorry, like having head coaching experience is good to have on the staff. Like Dillingham's only had one season of being a head coach, so we'll see how it goes. But it looks like a smart hire at this point.
Right. You can't go wrong with more experience. I completely agree. So yeah, we'll see how it plays out, but at least they have an OC and they're building out that staff a little bit.
Yeah, totally. So yeah, I'm reading a article, ArizonaSports.com. It says recruiting service 24/7 credits Arroyo with recruiting former Hamilton High School star Tyler Shuck, who was a top 10 quarterback in the class of 2018. It's expected that Arroyo would be the play caller for the offense going forward. Sun Devil source reported on Friday. Yeah, so it seems like a decent hire. I mean, him and Dillingham obviously would have a lot of similarities in terms of the scheme, but man, if it pays off in recruiting, like that's the big thing, like it. And we'll get into that in a bit, but it's that's a good thing, obviously, So, and Vince Amy. Oh wait, no, I'm sorry. This is about the next coach. So, any final thoughts on Arroyo before we move on to the defensive line coach they're bringing in?
Not necessarily. Again, just excited to see what happens in terms of what he'll be able to do with whoever is under center for ASU next year, depending on who stays and who goes.
Absolutely. All right. Defensive line coach. His name is Dyron. I'm going to say Darren. I'm just going to pronounce it Darren. It's spelled Diron. Probably Darren, right?
Yeah.
Dyron. Let's call him. Darren Reynolds. Was Michigan State's defensive line coach last year, following 8 seasons of that at Stanford. Will take over ASU's defensive line coaching job. And then this is from Chris Cartman from Sun Devil Source. Vince Amy, who was the defensive line coach last year, will remain with the Sun Devils in an analyst role, as part of which, like, he wants to spend more time with his family. So, I don't really know much about Darren Reynolds, but if you're at a place like Michigan State, that's impressive. And, being at Stanford that long, like you mentioned before the show, like they've produced so many good defensive lines, not recently, because they've been bad, but like within, he was there for 8 years. So obviously at some of those times he was doing a good job with it. So, from a recruiting thing, I hope that this guy helps out too. I've seen.
Well, yeah, I mean, you just talked about the loss of BJ Green, right?
Yeah.
And what the impact that might have on the front seven. If you're, obviously Michigan State is, well, things are kind of looking up with the Jonathan Smith hire, but before the Jonathan Smith hire, they were in a complete state of disarray. He probably
they were like last year.
Right.
Like
so,
last year at this time is what Michigan State is right now.
Right. So, and obviously had the time at Stanford, and some of the guys that have come out of Stanford along the defensive line have been at least productive college players, right? So, I mean, adding that guy to Brian Ward's staff, a staff that already produced a pretty solid defensive line and front seven last year, I think that level of experience and obviously a lot of NFL experience too with Reynolds. So adding him to the mix, I think will only make things a little better. And it's good to bring a guy like Ward back too. We talked about this a few weeks ago, but it can't be overstated how important that extension was in a sport with so many moving parts. So adding a guy that specializes along the defensive line to a system that has already been pretty productive in terms of what we saw last year, I think is only going to help them.
Absolutely.
Especially with recruiting, which is what you mentioned.
Yeah, absolutely. And it looks like there are a few Michigan State defensive linemen in the portal too. So
there you go.
You got one or two of those guys. You had a successful Michigan State defensive lineman transfer this past year in Deshaun Mallory. So we'll see how that goes. I hope that the Vince Amy thing isn't like that he was pushed out or something, but the fact that he's remaining on staff as an analyst makes me think that it was copacetic, I guess. But we'll see how that goes. But I mean, it's good to see new faces coming in and just Dillingham getting all the help he can get from people who've been at big programs and been in the mix. So speaking of recruiting, ASU had a recruiting weekend this past weekend and had a few high profile high school athletes in town. None more prominent than 4-star running back Jason Brown out of Seattle, who is apparently the top uncommitted running back in the 2024 class, according to 24/7 Sports. There's a lot of buzz about him going to ASU. I'm going to pull up some tweets on the screen real quick. But, I mean, getting a guy like this out of Seattle, where he is, like, UW is recruiting him, a team that is playing for the national championship, basically, and it's looking like he's going to go to ASU. I mean, that is such a. It's just, if they could land him, that would be so big, honestly.
Yeah, that would be a big step in the right direction for getting the recruiting back on track. I know we talked about coming into this season and even a little bit last season too, how a program in the midst of the investigation and everything else, which hopefully is coming, that resolution is coming soon, where we can finally turn the page on that.
Yeah.
But establishing that recruiting, your footing when it comes to recruiting again, just in terms of landing prominent high school athletes, I think is extremely important. So bringing in a guy like that out of UW's backyard,
Yeah.
could be pretty big. So we'll see what happens with that. Obviously, the reports are promising. The crystal ball percentages and everything like that look promising.
Good.
So yeah, we'll see what happens with that. But hopefully, he ends up choosing ASU, and we're talking about him.
Absolutely. I have this tweet pulled up here from Champ Westbrooks, who's a offensive line commit in ASU's 2024 class. After meeting him this weekend, I can see myself opening holes for this guy. Borks up. So, like, it seems kind of like an open secret when you have recruits tweeting, like, hey, like, it looks like he'll come here. I got another one from, I retweeted this earlier. I guess I didn't. Well, Jaden Fortier, who is another 4-star in ASU's class. He's the #1 player out of the state of Oregon, 4-star tight end. He's like won all the Player of the Year awards there. He basically tweeted like, ASU, we're going to have some good recruiting news coming up type of thing. So it's very indicative of like this guy, Jason Brown, who, like, honestly, when it was rumored that, ASU might be in the mix, I was just like, wait, what? Like, okay, like, I'm glad we're bringing him in type of thing. Like, I'm glad we're going after this kid, but like, we're not actually going to get him, right? Like, and then you see all these reports like, yeah, it's looking like he's trending toward ASU. And it's like, man. And then you bring in, I mean, we're rating the Northwest for they're the top town in the Northwest. So, I mean, that I guess like a part of that is just like Dillingham being just on these guys for years,
Right. I was
mean,
gonna say maybe it's got to be his reputation or something.
Yeah,
for these guys from that region.
absolutely. And like it's confirmed so much. It's just impressive. Like and honestly, if you're attracting a guy like Jason Brown, that makes me think the NIL stuff is at least sufficient, right? Because he's gotten offers from UW, from Oregon, Michigan State was once a big offer of his. Like, if you're swimming in those waters for a commit, that means you have a good enough NIL offer for him. And that's even more encouraging than getting Jason Brown at all, Like, it's never about just one recruit, right? Like, college football, you need a whole lot of players, obviously. And so, but if you're attracting high level recruits at this point, that means your NIL collective is good enough. And that's a good place to be if you're ASU, especially like, again, you're going to be playing in the Big 12 next year. And so, like, obviously there are good Big 12 teams, but I mean, we saw at the Big 12 championship, and Oklahoma State, they didn't look like they should be even on the same field as Texas. And that was the second best team in the league. And
100%.
so, and we saw, like, ASU played Oklahoma State this year and I'm not going to say like should have won because that's not true, but they
at least for
didn't
competitive.
look, yeah, they didn't look that like, it wasn't some huge, like, oh my gosh, how did, like, it was just like ASU like hung in there with them. Like, it wasn't like some mismatch is the long-winded way of what I should have said quicker. But, and so like when you factor all of that in, it's like, oh, now we're getting these blue chip recruits, you know, it's encouraging. It's encouraging. And I'll wrap this recruiting thing up. I know they had some other kids in town as well. But the most important of the people we haven't mentioned beyond Brown and Fortier, I'm sure that's not how his last name's pronounced, but I don't care. The number one player in Hawaii, he's not, yeah, number one player in Hawaii, his name's Rustin Young, 4-star offensive lineman, currently committed to Oregon State. Well, Oregon State is like going to be going to the Mountain West. And I'm sure that's a pretty strong recruiting pitch against Oregon State on that trip. So hopefully we get him too. Yeah, I'm just encouraged about their recruiting, you know, and it looks like we've cleared some NIL hurdles to be able to be more competitive in that space, which is nice. So, yeah.
Definitely. Yeah, some promising developments in terms of recruiting and staying competitive with some of these high level guys.
Yeah, and like I don't want to get like too into recruiting. Like I don't want to go over like every, you know, deep flip and deep, like, I mean, but when it's 4-star guys, a guy out of Seattle who, like, you're coming in late in the process too. That's the other thing. Like, we haven't been talking about this guy this whole year, you know, they're coming late in the process and it looks like they're going to get him, you know, it's a good sign. So we'll see if, you know, maybe they'll add another 4-star in there too. So, all right. Well, speaking of good signs, the other ASU sports that we talk about on this show have been doing well. Obviously, let's start with Sun Devil volleyball, who, again, like, JJ Van Niel has been incredible this year. I mean, just a complete turnaround because they were bad last year. They are heading to the Sweet 16 of volleyball after beating Georgia and BYU, both in Provo, over this most recent weekend. They won each match 3-0, and now they're playing number 1 seed Stanford, who,
Wow.
yeah, who they've beaten before too, by the way. Now they beat them in Mullet, but I mean, it's you know, again, we're only talking about volleyball
Yeah,
like a little bit, but like it's still
they beat them
super.
3-0. They lost 3-0. So
Yeah. Okay. You got that pulled up. Like my volleyball.
yeah, looks like one win over them and one loss over them. So this is the rubber match, so to speak.
Yeah. I mean, you're playing at Stanford, but it's going to be on ESPNU too on Thursday night. I'll have to check that out. You're playing at Stanford, but like the fact that you've beat them already, you know, you're
Is
going
this
in
the
with
Sweet 16?
Yeah, I don't know what it's officially called for volleyball, but it's the same. I looked up the bracket, and it's the same type of bracket. There's 16 teams left, so
Oh, okay.
yeah.
Wow.
So that's impressive, and you know, getting to the Sweet 16 is a good step already. Like no matter what happens, but the fact that you can go into this game against or this match against Stanford and be like, hey, we actually beat these women before. Uh, beat them in a volleyball match, of course. That didn't come out well. We actually beat these. We've defeated we have defeated Stanford previously this season, so we can do it again.
There you go.
That is encouraging for ASU volleyball, and you know, they have a chance. They're 28-6. Let's make it 29-6. ASU hockey. You like that save of mine?
You got through it.
let's beat these because I was gonna say like let's beat these guys, and I'm like, oh well, it's not men playing, so like let's beat
Well,
these
yeah,
women.
you were trying to be progressive and then just completely
Did
fumbled it.
not work out at all.
Yeah.
ASU men's hockey remains number 12 in the USCHO rankings. Over the weekend, they won the second game at Colorado College, and apparently they tied the first game. I looked it up, and apparently, like in college hockey, like for non-con, because ASU is technically not in a conference this year. For non-conference games that end in ties, it just stays as a tie. They don't go to overtime. So a tie and a win is better than a win and a loss, I guess. And they remain number 12 in the poll. Apparently, they're playing Dartmouth this upcoming weekend. So, just staying steady. ASU men's hockey, like it's good to see. Like they're not like dropping these dumb games. When they've shown how good they can be. Like it's not like a ASU men's basketball season of like years past where they beat Kansas and then they lose to some other like small team that you don't even know about. They're kind of just taking care of business, and it's good to see. And I mean, yeah, like I as the season goes along, I mean, I've mentioned this on the show a bunch of times that I need to get to a game. Got some good players, and like especially for novice hockey fans like us, like it's fun to watch a hockey game that ends 6-5 as opposed to one that's 2-1, right?
Yeah.
Like, and that's what I love about the ASU hockey games is like it's quick, and it's just a good product, and this is the best team they've had, right? And it's interesting to see what they will do because they're kind of just, even after like a not 100% awesome weekend, they remain in the same spot in the poll. So it's good to see.
Yeah, I agree with you, Mark. On that note, I unfortunately have to get off.
Gotta head out. Okay.
Yeah, I do. But it was a pleasure
right.
joining you.
Let me ask you one quick question about ASU men's basketball.
All right.
Like last two games, obviously not kind of on the same token as the hockey. Beat Sam Houston State by 15-ish. Beat San Francisco by 10-ish. Let me pull up the scores. Right. What are your just very surface level thoughts on those games?
Exercising the demons, man. Beating San Francisco after last year. That's kind of a mental hurdle, That's the team that made you sweat on one of the teams that made you sweat on Selection Sunday, right? So
yeah,
exercising that demon is good, and they're stringing together wins. We saw them be blown out by BYU, and obviously they've been blown out by
Mississippi
State, right? So just
two good teams.
Winning basketball games. That's all you have to do. It doesn't matter who you're playing. They're not bad teams. San Francisco is not a bad team. Sam Houston State's not a bad team relative to where they play. So just, you can only play who's on your schedule, right? So
right.
Winning those games and hopefully once we get into conference play, maybe stealing some games in that portion of your schedule will be huge. But I mean, you got to take care of the non-con first, and that's what they're doing. So
absolutely. Didn't see 1 second of the San Francisco game, but I was just checking the score yesterday at Andrew's house, and it was just they were up by 10 points the whole time. They just had them at a 10-point lead. And that is so encouraging.
That's
it wasn't
good.
some.
Don't let them back in, right? That's something they always struggle with is letting teams back in. So.
And then I was at the Sam Houston game. ASU didn't even play a great game. They still won by 15. So good stuff. 5-2 host SMU on Wednesday. And yeah, so ASU sports, fairly positive episode actually. With everything going on in the football team after a 3-9 season. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for tuning in. Kind of jammed a lot of things in this 50-minute episode or so. Colton, thanks for joining me today. I know you had a tight schedule.
Happy to hop on.
All right. Well, with that, I was going to make a joke.
Maybe you shouldn't.
I'm not going to say, but with that, thank you for listening. And as always, go Devils.